Maya had always believed that talent would be enough. Growing up in a small apartment above her grandmother's bakery, she spent every free moment at the old upright piano that sat in the corner of their living room. The keys were chipped and some didn't work properly, but Maya didn't care. When her fingers touched those keys, magic happened. Her grandmother, Rosa, would stop kneading dough just to listen. "That child has a gift from heaven," she would whisper to customers who lingered to hear the beautiful music floating down from upstairs. Maya's mother, Linda, worked double shifts at the hospital as a nurse, but she would come home exhausted and still smile when she heard her daughter playing. The turning point came when Maya was 16. Her high school music teacher, Mrs. Patterson, had fought hard to get Maya noticed by the admissions committee at Riverside Conservatory. It was the most prestigious music school in the state, and students there went on to perform with symphony orchestras and at famous concert halls around the world. Maya remembered the day she got the call. She was practicing Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, struggling with a particularly difficult passage, when the phone rang. Her mother answered, and Maya could hear the excitement in her voice even from the next room. "Maya, come here right now," her mother called out, her voice cracking with emotion. The woman on the phone introduced herself as Dr. Williams from Riverside Conservatory. "We've reviewed Maya's audition recording," she said, "and we're pleased to offer her a full scholarship. We were particularly impressed by her interpretation of the Chopin pieces. She has raw talent that we rarely see." Maya's hands shook as she held the phone. A full scholarship meant everything: tuition, room, board, and access to practice rooms with concert-quality grand pianos. It was a dream she'd barely dared to hope for. The first year at Riverside was like living in a different world. Maya had never seen piano so beautiful, never heard acoustics so perfect. Her dorm room was small but comfortable, and for the first time in her life, she could practice whenever she wanted without worrying about disturbing neighbors. Her roommate, Jessica, came from a wealthy family and had been taking lessons since she was 3 years old. "My parents spent $40,000 last year just on my private instructors," Jessica mentioned casually while unpacking designer clothes from expensive suitcases. Maya said nothing about her own background. She let people assume whatever they wanted about where she came from. What mattered was the music, and in the practice rooms she could hold her own against anyone. Professor Martinez, her main piano instructor, was demanding but fair. "You have natural musicality," he told Maya after her first lesson. "But you need to work on your technique. The talent is there, but technique is what will carry you through the difficult pieces." Maya threw herself into her studies with fierce determination. While other students went to parties or explored the city, she spent 8 to 10 hours a day practicing. Her calluses grew thick, and sometimes her back ached from hunching over the keys, but she didn't mind. This was her chance, and she wasn't going to waste it. By her second year, Maya was performing in student recitals and getting noticed by important people in the music world. A talent scout from the Chicago Symphony came to one of her performances and spoke to her afterward. "Keep working hard," he said, handing her his business card. "I'll be watching your progress. But life has a way of changing course when you least expect it." The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in October of her 3rd year. Maya was in music theory class when her phone buzzed with a call from her mother. She usually never answered during class, but something made her step out into the hallway. "Maya, honey, you need to sit down." Her mother's voice was strained and tired. "What's wrong, Mom?" "Is Grandma Rosa okay?" "It's about me, sweetheart. I've been having some symptoms and the doctors ran some tests." Linda paused and Maya could hear her taking a shaky breath. "I have cancer, Maya. It's in my lungs and it's already spread to other parts of my body." The hallway seemed to spin around Maya. Students walked past her, laughing and talking about normal things like weekend plans and upcoming exams, but their voices sounded far away and muffled. "How bad is it?" Maya whispered. "The doctors say we caught it pretty late. The treatment is going to be expensive, even with my insurance, and I'm going to need help, especially during the chemotherapy." Maya's mind raced. "I'll come home this weekend. We'll figure this out." "No, baby, you stay in school. This is your dream, and I won't let my problems destroy that." But Maya was already making mental calculations. The treatment would cost thousands of dollars. Her mother would need help with daily tasks, someone to drive her to appointments, someone to take care of Grandma Rosa too. The bakery downstairs was barely making enough money to cover rent. That weekend, Maya took the bus home for the first time since school started. The 4-hour ride gave her time to think, but every thought led to the same conclusion. Her family needed her more than she needed her degree. Her mother looked smaller somehow, like the diagnosis had already begun to shrink her, but she smiled when Maya walked through the door, the same smile that had greeted her every day after school for 18 years. "Tell me about your classes," Linda said, settling into her favorite armchair. "Are you still working on that Beethoven sonata?" Maya sat at the old upright piano and played a few measures. The keys felt different now, heavier and less responsive than the concert grands at school. But there was something comforting about the familiar touch, the way this piano had been part of her life for so long. Over the next few days, Maya watched her mother try to maintain her normal routine. Linda still went to work, still helped Grandma Rosa with the bakery in the evenings, still asked about Maya's studies as if nothing had changed. But Maya could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the way she moved more carefully, the prescription bottles that had appeared on the kitchen counter. The bills started coming within weeks. Even with insurance, the co-pays and medications were overwhelming. Maya's mother tried to hide the financial stress, but Maya found the notices piling up on the kitchen table: past due electricity, overdue rent, medical bills with numbers that made Maya's stomach clench. "Mom, let me help," Maya said one evening as they sat together after dinner. "You help by staying in school and following your dreams," Linda replied firmly. "That's all I've ever wanted for you." But dreams felt like luxury when reality was knocking so hard at the door. Maya made the hardest decision of her life on a gray November morning. She called Dr. Williams at Riverside Conservatory and explained the situation. "I understand this is difficult," Dr. Williams said kindly. "We can arrange for a leave of absence. Your scholarship will be held for up to 1 year while you handle your family emergency." 1 year. Maya hoped it would be enough. She moved back home permanently the next week. Her dorm room, which had felt like home for 3 years, was packed up in a few hours. Jessica helped her carry boxes to the car, both of them crying. "You'll be back," Jessica said, hugging Maya tightly. "This isn't the end of your story." Maya wanted to believe that, but as she drove away from Riverside for what might be the last time, doubt crept into her heart like winter air through a cracked window. Back home, Maya threw herself into caring for her mother and helping with the bakery. She drove Linda to chemotherapy appointments 3 times a week, holding her hand while poison dripped into her veins in hopes of killing the cancer cells. She helped Grandma Rosa with the early morning baking, learning to shape loaves and frost cakes with the same precision she once used for piano scales. The piano sat silent for weeks. Maya was too tired to play, and somehow it felt wrong to make music when there was so much sadness in the house. But slowly, as her mother's treatment progressed, Maya began to play again. Softly at first, just simple melodies in the evenings after the bakery closed, then gradually more complex pieces, working through the repertoire she'd learned at Riverside. "Play the one I love," her mother would say, settling into her chair with a cup of tea. Maya knew she meant Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the piece that had gotten her into Riverside in the first place. As Maya played, some of the worry lines would fade from her mother's face. Grandma Rosa would hum along from the kitchen, and for a few minutes their little apartment above the bakery would feel filled with hope instead of fear. The 1-year leave of absence came and went. Maya's mother was responding well to treatment, but the medical bills kept coming. The bakery was struggling to compete with the new chain stores that had opened nearby. Maya took a job at a local restaurant, waitressing during lunch and dinner rushes, but it wasn't enough. One evening, as Maya counted out bills on the kitchen table, trying to decide which ones could wait another month, she realized that her old life was truly gone. The girl who had played Rachmaninoff in concert halls and dreamed of performing with symphony orchestras had become a young woman who worried about rent and grocery money. The hardest part was watching her dreams slip away day by day, like sand through her fingers. The piano that had once been her gateway to a different life was now just a piece of furniture, something she played for her family's comfort rather than her own growth. But Maya didn't know that the most difficult part of her journey was still ahead. She didn't know. 2 years had passed since Maya left Riverside Conservatory. Her mother's cancer was in remission, but the medical bills had created a mountain of debt that seemed impossible to climb. The bakery was barely staying afloat, and Maya's restaurant job paid just enough to keep the lights on. Winter had been particularly brutal. The heating bills were enormous, and several times Maya had to choose between buying groceries and paying utilities. She learned to layer sweaters and blankets, to make soup from whatever vegetables were cheapest at the market, to smile at customers even when her stomach was growling. It was during one of those cold February nights that everything fell apart, completely. Maya came home from her evening shift at the restaurant to find her mother and grandmother sitting at the kitchen table with papers spread out between them. Both women had been crying. "What's wrong?" Maya asked, though she could feel her heart already sinking. "The bank called today," her mother said quietly. "We're 3 months behind on the mortgage. They're starting foreclosure proceedings." Maya sank into a chair, staring at the official-looking documents. Numbers swam before her eyes, amounts owed, legal fees, deadlines that were impossible to meet. "How much do we need?" Maya asked. $12,000 by the end of next week, Grandma Rosa whispered. "Or we lose everything." Maya's mind raced through possibilities. She could ask for extra shifts at the restaurant, but even working every single day wouldn't generate that kind of money in a week. She could try to get a loan, but her credit was already stretched thin from her mother's medical expenses. "There's something else," her mother said, her voice breaking. "Dr. Peterson called with my test results from last week. The cancer is back. It's aggressive this time, and I need to start treatment immediately." The room seemed to tilt around Maya. Just when they thought they were getting back on their feet, everything was crumbling again. That night, Maya sat at the piano and tried to play, but her fingers felt clumsy and disconnected. The music that had once flowed through her like breathing now felt forced and hollow. She closed the piano lid and went to bed. But sleep wouldn't come. For the next 3 days, Maya frantically searched for solutions. She called everyone she could think of. Old classmates, former teachers, distant relatives. Most people were sympathetic but couldn't help with such a large amount of money. A few offered small amounts that wouldn't make a real difference. Maya even swallowed her pride and called Riverside Conservatory to ask if there were any emergency funds available for former students. Dr. Williams was kind but honest. There were no programs for situations like Maya's. By Thursday, Maya had exhausted every option she could think of. That's when she found herself standing outside Bellacorta, the most expensive Italian restaurant in the downtown theater district. Maya had walked past Bellacourt many times, but never imagined she'd have reason to go inside. The building was elegant, with tall windows and white tablecloths visible through the glass. Well-dressed people sat at candlelit tables, drinking wine that probably cost more than Maya made in a week. She had noticed the piano through the window, a beautiful black grand piano that sat in the corner of the main dining room. It looked like it belonged in a concert hall rather than a restaurant. The idea had come to her in desperation. She had no formal business plan, no connections, no experience asking strangers for money. But she had her talent, and maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. Maya pushed through the heavy glass doors and immediately felt out of place. Her worn winter coat and scuffed shoes stood out starkly against the polished marble floors and crystal chandeliers. A hostess in an elegant black dress looked her up and down with barely concealed disapproval. "Do you have a reservation?" the hostess asked, her tone making it clear she already knew the answer. "No, I was wondering if I could speak to the manager," Maya said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Regarding what?" Maya took a deep breath. "I'd like to offer my services as a pianist. I could play during dinner service. Maybe help create a nicer atmosphere for your guests." The hostess laughed, not unkindly, but in the way people laugh when they think someone doesn't understand how the world works. "Honey, this isn't that kind of establishment. We don't have live music, and we certainly don't hire people who just walk in off the street." She paused, looking Maya up and down again. "Maybe try the diner on 5th Street. They might be more your speed." Maya felt her cheeks burning, but she didn't leave. "Please, could I just speak to someone? I'm really good, I promise. I studied at Riverside Conservatory. Look, I'm sure you're very talented, but Mr. Rossini doesn't see people without appointments. And he definitely doesn't hire street musicians." Street musician. The words hit Maya like a slap. Is that what she looked like? Is that what she'd become? Maya left Bellacourt with her dignity bruised but her desperation undiminished. She tried 2 more upscale restaurants with similar results. At the 3rd place, the manager was more direct. "Listen, kid, I can see you're in some kind of trouble, but this isn't a charity. We don't hire musicians and we don't give handouts. If you need money, get a real job." By Friday evening, Maya was out of options and nearly out of time. She had one day left before the foreclosure deadline, and she'd exhausted every conventional possibility. That's when she made the decision. That would change everything. Maya went to the supply closet in her apartment and found a piece of cardboard from an old box. Using a black marker, she wrote in simple block letters, "We'll play piano for food." She stared at the sign for a long time, imagining what people would think when they saw it. A college-educated woman, a former conservatory student, reduced to begging with a cardboard sign. The humiliation felt almost physical, like a weight pressing down on her chest. But her family's survival was more important than her pride. Saturday evening found Maya back outside Bellacourt, holding her sign and trying to work up the courage to go inside. She watched through the windows as elegantly dressed couples enjoyed expensive meals and fine wine. These were people who spent more on one dinner than Maya's family spent on groceries in a month. Finally, as the dinner rush was reaching its peak, Maya pushed through the doors one more time. The same hostess was working, and her expression shifted from annoyance to something approaching shock when she saw Maya's sign. "You cannot be serious," she said. "You can't panhandle in here. I'm calling security. Please just let me play one song," Maya said, loud enough that several nearby diners turned to look. "I'm not asking for money directly. I'm offering to perform in exchange for a meal. This is ridiculous. You need to leave right now." But Maya didn't leave. Instead, she held up her sign higher and spoke loud enough for more people to hear. "I'm a trained classical pianist. I studied at Riverside Conservatory. My mother has cancer and we're about to lose our home. I'm not asking for charity. I'm offering to play piano in exchange for just one meal." The restaurant had grown noticeably quieter. Conversations paused as people turned to look at the young woman with the cardboard sign, standing in the elegant entrance of Bellacourt. Mr. Rossini, the restaurant manager, emerged from the back office looking thunderous. He was a large man in an expensive suit and his face was red with anger. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice carrying an Italian accent that would have sounded charming in other circumstances. "Sir, she just walked in with that sign," the hostess explained quickly. "I told her to leave, but she won't go." Mr. Rossini looked Maya up and down with obvious disdain. "Miss, you cannot solicit in my restaurant. This is a high-class establishment, not a soup kitchen." "I'm not soliciting," Maya said, trying to keep her voice from shaking. "I'm offering a service. I can play your piano. Classical music, jazz, whatever your customers would enjoy." Several diners had stopped eating entirely now, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Some looked sympathetic, others appeared annoyed at the disruption to their expensive evening out. Mr. Rossini glanced around at his customers, clearly calculating the impact of this scene on his business. "That piano hasn't been tuned in months. It's purely decorative." "I don't care about the tuning," Maya said. "Just give me a chance, one song. If your customers don't like it, I'll leave and never come back." A well-dressed woman at a nearby table spoke up. "Oh, let her play something. It might be entertaining." Her companion laughed. "What could she possibly play? She looks like she hasn't seen the inside of a music school in her life. Probably knows 3 chords and thinks she's a concert pianist," another man added, causing his table mates to snicker. Mr. Rossini raised his hands for quiet. "Fine," he announced, his voice carrying across the dining room. "You want to play? I'll let you play one song. But when you embarrass yourself and prove you're just another street performer trying to scam my customers, you leave immediately and don't come back." He gestured dramatically toward the piano in the corner. "And when nobody claps, when nobody gives you any money, and when everyone goes back to their conversations because your playing is mediocre at best, you'll understand why we don't hire people off the street." Maya felt every eye in the restaurant following her as she walked toward the piano. Her legs felt unsteady, and her hands were shaking so badly she wasn't sure she'd be able to play anything at all. Maya's fingers found the opening notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. It was the piece that had gotten her into Riverside Conservatory, the piece she had played at her first student recital, the piece her mother always requested when the weight of the world felt too heavy to bear. Despite the piano's imperfect tuning and the trembling in her hands, the first few measures rang out with haunting beauty. The melody was simple at first, almost conversational, like someone beginning to tell a story they weren't sure anyone wanted to hear. Maya had chosen this piece for a reason. It wasn't flashy or obviously impressive like some of the more famous classical works. Instead, it was deeply emotional, building slowly from quiet contemplation to passionate intensity. It was a piece about struggle, about finding beauty in darkness, about refusing to give up even when everything seems lost. As she played, Maya felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. Her fingers remembered the familiar patterns, the way this piece had been part of her life for so many years. She forgot about the restaurant around her, forgot about the people watching and judging, forgot about everything except the music flowing through her. The conversations in the restaurant had stopped completely now. Forks remained suspended halfway to mouths as diners found themselves drawn into the unexpected performance. The hostess who had tried to remove Maya stood frozen by the entrance, her hand still reaching for the phone she had been about to use to call security. Mr. Rossini had intended to let Maya play just long enough to embarrass herself, then escort her out with a lecture about wasting his customers' time. But as the melody developed, becoming more complex and emotionally rich, his expression began to change. His arms, which had been crossed impatiently across his chest, slowly dropped to his sides. In the kitchen, the cooks and servers had abandoned their tasks to listen. The dishwasher, a young man from El Salvador who sent most of his wages home to his family, stood with soapy hands dripping as tears ran down his face. The music reminded him of his mother's singing, of evenings when his family would gather around their old radio and listen to classical programs from the city. Maya reached the first climatic passage of the piece, her left hand driving forward with powerful, rolling chords while her right hand sang the melody with increasing intensity. This was where technique mattered as much as emotion, where years of practice and proper training separated real musicians from pretenders. But Maya's technique was flawless. Even on the imperfectly tuned piano, every note was clear and precisely timed. Her dynamics moved from whisper-soft passages to thunderous climaxes, with the kind of control that only comes from years of serious study. At table 12, an elderly man named Frank Patterson sat with his adult daughter, celebrating her promotion at the law firm where she worked. Frank had been a piano teacher for 40 years before retiring, and he had heard thousands of students play this same piece. Most of them played it adequately. Some played it well. But Maya was playing it with the kind of musical understanding that he had encountered maybe 5 times in his entire career. "Dad, you're crying," his daughter whispered, reaching across the table to touch his hand. Frank wiped his eyes, not taking his gaze away from Maya. "That young woman," he said quietly, "is extraordinary. Listen to how she shapes the phrases, how she builds the emotional arc. This isn't just good playing, this is artistry." Across the restaurant, other conversations were happening in hushed whispers. "I thought she was just some homeless girl trying to scam us," admitted the woman who had earlier suggested letting Maya play for entertainment. "Look at her technique," her companion replied. "She's had serious training, real training." At the bar, 2 men who worked in the entertainment industry were leaning forward, completely absorbed in the performance. "That's conservatory level playing," one of them said. "Maybe better. How does someone with that kind of talent end up carrying a cardboard sign?" His friend shook his head. "Life happens, man. Talent doesn't pay the bills." Maya transitioned into the middle section of the piece, where Chopin's melody becomes more introspective and questioning. Her touch became lighter, more delicate, as if she were sharing a secret with everyone in the room. The restaurant's usual sounds, the clink of glasses, the rustle of cloth napkins, the quiet murmur of service, had disappeared entirely. Even the most skeptical listeners were being won over. The businessman who had made the snide comment about 3 chords found himself leaning forward in his chair, completely captivated by the music's emotional depth. He thought of his own daughter, who was Maya's age and struggling to make it as an artist in New York. How many talented young people were out there, he wondered, fighting battles that nobody could see. Maya's mother had always told her that music was a language that everyone could understand, even if they didn't realize it. As she played, Maya could feel that truth in the silence of the room, in the way people's breathing had synchronized with the rhythm of the piece, in the collective intake of breath when she hit particularly beautiful harmonies. The piece moved into its final section, where all the emotional threads come together in a powerful conclusion. Maya's playing became more intense, more urgent, as if she were pouring all her desperation and hope into these final minutes. Her left hand provided a driving, almost orchestral accompaniment, while her right hand soared above with a melody that was both tragic and triumphant. This was the hardest part of the piece technically, requiring perfect coordination between both hands and the stamina to maintain intensity without sacrificing precision. Maya's years of practice at Riverside served her well. Her body remembered how to support this kind of playing, how to use her entire frame to create power without tension. But more than technique, Maya was drawing on something deeper. Every worry about her mother's health, every sleepless night counting bills, every moment of doubt about whether she'd made the right choice leaving school, all of it was flowing into the music. The piece became not just Chopin's story but her own story, a musical autobiography of struggle and perseverance. The final climax arrived like a thunderstorm. Maya's hands moved across the keyboard with passionate intensity, the poorly maintained piano somehow rising to meet her energy. The sound filled every corner of the restaurant, making the crystal glasses vibrate and causing several people to instinctively lean back in their chairs. Then suddenly, the storm passed. Maya's hands moved to the highest register of the piano for the piece's gentle conclusion. After all the drama and intensity, Chopin ends the ballad with something like peace. Not the peace of resolution, but the peace of acceptance, of knowing that you've given everything you had to give. Maya played the final notes with infinite tenderness, letting each one ring in the silence before gently releasing the sustained pedal. Her hands remained on the keys for a moment longer, and then she slowly sat back on the bench. The silence that followed was unlike anything Bellecourt had ever experienced. 67 people sat in complete stillness, processing what they had just heard. Some were crying openly. Others sat with their mouths slightly open, still absorbing the beauty of what had just occurred. Maya looked up for the first time since she'd started playing, and the scene that greeted her was nothing like what she had expected. Every face in the restaurant was turned toward her. Most people looked stunned, as if they had just witnessed something they hadn't thought was possible. Mr. Rossini stood near the kitchen entrance, his face a mixture of shock and shame. This was not the embarrassing amateur performance he had expected. This was the kind of playing that belonged in concert halls, not family restaurants. This was the kind of talent that made him question everything he thought he knew about judging people by their appearance. The hostess, who had tried to remove Maya, was staring with her hand over her heart, tears streaming down her face. She thought of her own abandoned dreams of becoming a dancer, of the talent agent who had told her she wasn't pretty enough, of the years she'd spent telling herself that dreams were for other people. At table 7, a talent agent named David Chen sat in stunned silence. He had come to Bellecourt for a business dinner, expecting to discuss contract details over pasta and wine. Instead, he had just heard one of the most moving piano performances of his life. He was already reaching for his business cards, his mind racing with possibilities. The applause, when it finally came, started slowly. Frank Patterson, the retired piano teacher, was the first to clap. His applause was measured and respectful, the kind of appreciation one artist gives another. His daughter joined him, then the people at the next table, then the next. Within seconds, the entire restaurant erupted. People stood up from their chairs, applauding not just politely but with genuine enthusiasm. Some were cheering. Others were wiping tears from their eyes as they clapped. Maya sat at the piano bench, overwhelmed by the response. She had hoped that people might appreciate the music enough to buy her a meal. She had never expected anything like this, but the evening was far from over. As the applause continued, Maya noticed something that made her heart skip. People were not just clapping. They were reaching for their wallets. As the applause continued, Frank Patterson stood up from his table. The 70-year-old retired piano teacher moved slowly through the restaurant, weaving between tables as other diners made way for him. His face was still wet with tears, but his expression was determined. "Young lady," he said when he reached the piano, his voice carrying clearly in the now quiet restaurant. "That was the most beautiful performance of that piece I've heard in 40 years of teaching music." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet, extracting a $20 bill. But instead of simply placing it somewhere, he walked over to Maya's cardboard sign, which she had left leaning against a nearby chair. "This is insulting," he said, holding up the sign. "Someone with your talent shouldn't have to beg for food." He placed the $20 bill on top of the piano, then looked around the restaurant. "This young woman is a true artist. What we just heard was worth more than most of us pay for concert tickets. His words seemed to break a dam of emotion in the room. Suddenly, people were standing up all around the restaurant, reaching for their purses and wallets. A woman in an elegant evening dress approached next. "I'm on the board of the Metropolitan Arts Foundation," she said to Maya. "We give grants to promising young artists. I'd like to talk to you after everyone settles down." She placed a $50 bill next to Frank's 20. The businessman who had earlier mocked Maya's appearance came forward looking embarrassed. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "And I owe you this." He placed a $100 bill on the growing pile of money. "My daughter is studying music in college. I hope someday she plays with half the passion you just showed us." One by one, people approached the piano. Not everyone gave money. Some simply wanted to tell Maya how the music had moved them. But many did contribute, and the amounts were far more generous than Maya had dared to hope for. David Chen, the talent agent, waited until the crowd had thinned before approaching. He handed Maya his business card along with $200. "I represent classical musicians," he said. "I'd like to discuss your career goals if you have time this week." Maya stared at the business card, barely able to process what was happening. I don't have a career right now. I left school to take care of my mother." "We'll talk about that," David said. "Talent like yours doesn't disappear just because life gets complicated." Near the kitchen, Mr. Rossini stood watching everything unfold with a mixture of amazement and regret. He thought about his own journey from a small village in Italy to owning one of the city's most successful restaurants. He remembered what it felt like to be underestimated, to have people judge him by his accent and his rough hands instead of his ability to create something beautiful. He approached Maya as the last of the well-wishers returned to their tables. "Miss," he said, his voice much gentler than it had been earlier. "I need to apologize. I was wrong about you, and I was wrong to treat you with disrespect." Maya looked up at him, still overwhelmed by everything that had happened. "I would like to offer you a job," Mr. Rossini continued, "not out of pity, but because what you did tonight was good for my business and good for my customers' hearts. Would you consider playing here on weekend evenings? I'll pay you well, and you can keep whatever tips people give you." Before Maya could answer, Frank Patterson spoke up again. "With respect, Mr. Rossini, this young woman belongs on concert stages, not in restaurants." He turned to Maya. "Have you considered auditioning for the City Symphony? They have openings for piano soloists." "The Riverside Conservatory would take you back in a heartbeat," added the woman from the Arts Foundation. "I know people there. Your scholarship could probably be reinstated." Maya felt dizzy listening to all the possibilities being discussed around her. An hour ago, she had been a desperate young woman with a cardboard sign, hoping someone might buy her a sandwich. Now people were talking about symphony, positions and scholarships as if these things were actually within reach. She looked down at the money that had accumulated on the piano. There had to be at least $800 there, more than she made in a month at the restaurant where she waited tables. "I need to call my mother," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Rossini gestured toward his office. "Use my phone. Take all the time you need." Maya gathered the money with shaking hands, amazed by the generosity of strangers who had been moved by her music. She made her way to Mr. Rossini's office, a small room behind the kitchen filled with invoices and restaurant supply catalogs. Her mother answered on the second ring. "Maya, is everything okay?" "It's pretty late. Mom, something incredible just happened." Maya's words tumbled out in a rush as she described the evening. The performance, the response, the money, the job offers, the business cards from important people in the music world. Linda was quiet for a long moment after Maya finished. "How much money?" she asked finally. "At least $800, Mom, maybe more. And that's just from tonight." Maya could hear her mother crying softly on the other end of the line. "We can make the mortgage payment," Linda said through her tears. "We can keep the house. And there might be more opportunities," Maya added. "People want to help. Real music industry people." When Maya returned to the dining room, most of the customers had gone back to their meals, but the atmosphere in the restaurant had completely changed. Conversations were more animated, laughter was more frequent, and several people were still talking about the performance they had just witnessed. Frank Patterson was waiting for her with his daughter, who introduced herself as Rachel. "My father has an idea," Rachel said. He thinks you should put together a recital program and start performing again seriously. I don't know if I'm ready for that, Maya admitted. It's been 2 years since I played regularly. Frank shook his head. What you just played proves you haven't lost anything important. Technique can be polished, but musical understanding like yours is rare. You have something special, and the world needs to hear it. David Chen joined their conversation. I've been thinking about what you said, about leaving school to care for your mother. There might be ways to work around that. Scholarships with flexible schedules, maybe some recording opportunities that could provide steady income while you finish your degree. Maya felt a spark of hope she hadn't experienced in years. Do you really think it's possible? I think what happened here tonight proves that anything is possible, David replied. People don't respond to music the way they just did unless something extraordinary is happening. As the evening wound down, Maya found herself surrounded by business cards and promises of phone calls. The woman from the Arts Foundation wanted to set up a meeting to discuss grant possibilities. A local music professor offered to give her refresher lessons to prepare for auditions. Even Mr. Rossini's job offer remained open, providing a reliable source of income while she pursued bigger opportunities. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came when the restaurant's dishwasher, Carlos, approached her as she was getting ready to leave. Miss, he said in accented English, my English is not so good, but I wanted to thank you. The music you played, it reminded me of my home, of my family. It made me feel less alone. He pressed a crumpled $5 bill into her hand. Maya knew it probably represented a significant sacrifice for him, and she was more touched by his gesture than by all the larger donations she had received. Keep practicing, he added. The world needs beautiful music. Maya walked home that night with more money in her pocket than she had seen in months, but more importantly, she walked home with something she had almost forgotten existed: hope. The cardboard sign that had seemed so humiliating a few hours earlier was now folded carefully in her bag. Not because she planned to use it again, but because she wanted to remember this night. To remember that sometimes the most frightening moments can become doorways to unexpected possibilities. When she arrived at the apartment above the bakery, she found her mother and grandmother waiting up for her, both wearing expressions of worried excitement. Tell us everything, Grandma Rosa said, pulling Maya into the kitchen where a pot of coffee was already brewing. As Maya recounted the evening's events for the second time, she watched her mother's face transform. The worry lines that had become permanent features over the past 2 years began to soften. The constant tension around her eyes eased for the first time in months. Play something for us, Linda said when Maya finished her story. I want to hear what those people heard. Maya sat down at their old upright piano, the same instrument where she had first discovered her love of music all those years ago. The keys felt familiar and comforting after the elegant but imperfect grand piano at Bellecourt. She played the Chopin Nocturne that her mother loved, the piece that had become a soundtrack to their struggles and their hopes. As the gentle melody filled their small apartment, Maya realized that something fundamental had shifted tonight. For the first time in 2 years, the future felt full of possibilities instead of limitations. Her music had found its power again, and with it, Maya had found her way back to herself. 6 months after that life-changing evening at Bellecourt, Maya sat in the green room backstage at Carnegie Hall, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her concert dress. Through the thin walls, she could hear the murmur of the audience settling into their seats, over 2,000 people who had come to hear her play. It still felt like a dream. The journey from that desperate night with a cardboard sign to this moment had been intense and transformative. David Chen had been true to his word, working tirelessly to create opportunities for Maya while respecting her need to remain close to home for her mother's care. The first breakthrough had come just 2 weeks after the Bellecourt performance. The woman from the Metropolitan Arts Foundation, Mrs. Elizabeth Harper, had arranged for Maya to audition for a special emergency scholarship program. The foundation had been so impressed with her playing that they had created a custom grant, one that would allow Maya to complete her degree through a combination of distance learning and intensive summer programs, while also providing a monthly stipend for her family's expenses. We've never done anything quite like this before, Mrs. Harper had explained during their first meeting. But extraordinary circumstances call for extraordinary solutions. Your talent is too important to let slip away. The scholarship had solved Maya's immediate financial crisis, but it was Frank Patterson who had pushed her toward the bigger stage. The retired piano teacher had become an unofficial mentor, spending hours with Maya each week helping her rebuild the technical skills that had grown rusty. During her time away from serious practice, "You have something that can't be taught," he told her repeatedly during their sessions. "But you need to polish the mechanics to match the artistry." Frank had also been the one to suggest she audition for the Young Artists Showcase, a prestigious program that gave emerging musicians the chance to perform with major symphony orchestras. The audition process had been grueling. 3 rounds of increasingly difficult repertoire, each one eliminating more hopeful candidates. Maya had almost withdrawn from the competition after the first round. Sitting in the waiting room with dozens of other young pianists, many of whom had attended famous conservatories and studied with world-renowned teachers, she had felt like an imposter. "I don't belong here," she had whispered to Frank, who had driven her to the audition. "Look at these people. They've been preparing for this their whole lives without interruption. And you've been living life," Frank had replied firmly. "That experience, that struggle, it's in your playing now. That's what made those people at Bellecourt cry. That's what's going to set you apart here too." He had been right. Maya's performance of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 had left the judges stunned. Her technical execution was flawless, but more importantly, her interpretation was deeply personal and emotionally compelling. She played not just the notes on the page, but the story of someone who had lost everything and found her way back through music. The judges had announced their decision immediately after her performance. Maya had won not just a place in the showcase, but the top prize, a solo performance with the New York Philharmonic at Carnegie Hall. Now, as Maya prepared for the most important performance of her life, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. Her mother's cancer treatment had been successful again, and Linda was now strong enough to attend tonight's concert. She and Grandma Rosa were sitting in the front row, along with Frank and his daughter, David Chen, Mrs. Harper, and surprisingly, Mr. Rossini and several of the staff from Bellecourt. Even Carlos, the dishwasher who had given her his crumpled $5 bill, was in the audience. David Chen had arranged for tickets for all the restaurant staff who had been working that transformative night 6 months ago. A knock at the green room door interrupted Maya's thoughts. "5 minutes, Miss Rivera," called the stage manager. Maya took a deep breath and looked at herself in the mirror one last time. The young woman staring back at her looked confident and poised. Nothing like the desperate girl who had carried a cardboard sign into an upscale restaurant. But Maya knew that girl was still part of her and always would be. The struggle had changed her music, made it deeper and more authentic. She walked toward the stage, her heels clicking on the polished floors of Carnegie Hall. As she approached the wings, she could see the magnificent Steinway concert grand piano waiting in the spotlight. Surrounded by the full orchestra, the conductor, Maestro Williams, smiled and nodded as she passed. "Remember," he said quietly, "they're here because they want to hear what you have to say through the music. Trust yourself." Maya walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. The lights were bright enough that she couldn't see individual faces in the audience, but she knew her family and friends were out there. More importantly, she knew that somewhere in that crowd were people who needed to hear music that spoke to struggle and hope, just as those diners at Bellecourt had needed it 6 months ago. She sat at the piano bench and adjusted it slightly, then looked up at Maestro Williams. He raised his baton, the orchestra lifted their instruments, and Maya placed her hands on the keys. The opening notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 rang out through the hall, supported by the lush orchestration. This was the piece that had first shown Maya the power of music to express complex emotions. And tonight she was playing it with the full weight of her experiences behind it. As she moved through the first movement, Maya felt completely connected to the music. Every struggle of the past few years informed her interpretation. The late nights worrying about medical bills, the humiliation of asking for help, the fear of losing everything, and ultimately, the joy of discovering that talent and determination could overcome almost anything. The audience was completely absorbed. In the front row, Linda wiped tears from her eyes as she heard her daughter's story told through Rachmaninoff's notes. This was the same piece Maya had been practicing that day when the phone call came about the cancer diagnosis. But tonight it sounded like a celebration rather than a lament. During the quiet second movement, Maya thought about all the people who had believed in her when she had stopped believing in herself. Frank Patterson, who had seen past her circumstances to her true potential. David Chen, who had worked tirelessly to create opportunities. Mrs. Harper, who had convinced a foundation to take an unprecedented risk on a struggling young artist. But most of all, she thought about her mother and grandmother, who had sacrificed so much and never once suggested that Maya should give up on her dreams. The final movement was a triumph of technical virtuosity and emotional expression. Maya's hands flew across the keyboard with precision and passion, the orchestra swelling behind her in perfect partnership. This was the music she had been born to play, and this was the moment she had been born for. As the final chords rang out through Carnegie Hall, the silence that followed was electric. Then the audience erupted in an ovation unlike anything Maya had ever experienced. People leaped to their feet, applauding and cheering with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for sports events. Maya stood and bowed, overwhelmed by the response. She gestured to the orchestra, acknowledging their contribution, then looked out into the audience. Though she couldn't see them clearly, she felt the presence of everyone who had supported her journey. Backstage after the performance, Maya was surrounded by well-wishers and industry professionals. Recording contracts were discussed, future performance opportunities were outlined, and several major music schools expressed interest in having her join their faculty once she completed her degree. But the moment that meant the most came when her mother and grandmother made their way backstage. "Mia," Grandma Rosa said, her voice thick with emotion, "your grandfather would have been so proud. He always said music was the language of the soul." Linda hugged her daughter tightly. "You did it," she whispered. "You found your way back." Frank Patterson approached with tears in his eyes. "That was magnificent," he said. "You've taken everything you've learned, in school and in life, and made it into something uniquely beautiful." David Chen was already fielding calls from major venues wanting to book Maya for future performances. "The phone hasn't stopped ringing," he told her with a grin. "Everyone wants to work with you." But perhaps the most meaningful congratulations came from Carlos, the dishwasher from Bellacourt, who had somehow made his way backstage. "Miss Maya," he said in his careful English, "tonight you gave us hope. People like us who sometimes think beautiful things are not for us. You showed us they are." As the evening wound down and Maya finally had a quiet moment to reflect, she realized that her story was far from over. This performance was not an ending, but a beginning. She had rediscovered her voice as an artist, but more importantly, she had learned that true strength comes from facing difficulties with grace and never giving up on what matters most. The cardboard sign was still in her apartment, carefully preserved in a frame that Frank had made for her. Not as a reminder of desperation, but as a symbol of the courage it takes to ask for help and the magic that can happen when talent meets opportunity. Maya had learned that sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what you're truly capable of achieving. Her music had been good before her struggles,